This one's quite ironic because I'm going to talk about UV radiation again, and I'm going to be talking from indoors. And so, three separate people said to me yesterday about, because I was outside in the sun, said about, don't get burnt, protect yourself, put sunscreen on, etc. And it just goes to show, like, not everyone said about sunscreen, but how indoctrinated we are to flimsy science at best, that says sun exposure is bad, sun exposure is negative, sun exposure causes cancer. That is the one I hear the most. And I say to you, all right, go and read the studies then. Go and read the studies that say sun exposure causes cancer. And once you've read the studies about sun exposure, you'll actually realise that sun exposure and UVB, and with regards to vitamin D synthesis, actually has very, very, very protective mechanisms against it. So whether we're talking about cardiovascular disease, whether we're talking about multiple sclerosis, whether we're talking about allergies and asthma, whether we're talking about diabetes, obesity, infections, depression, dementia, other types of neurodegeneration, autoimmune diseases, and other ones, like other issues, are all positively related to vitamin D, which we can only synthesize through UVB. So if the sunlight was so bad, why the hell did we evolve for vitamin D synthesis, only achieved through UV, only achieved through sun exposure, being so important on so many aspects of our health? It makes zero sense. Other than people wanting to make money from you buying products that they want you to sell or they want you to buy. And even if we stop there and we think about the cancer aspect, I say, okay, go and read the research about the cancer. And then actually what you find is that UV exposure, vitamin D levels actually have a very strong correlation. So the higher your vitamin D levels, the lower your incidence of cancers. Specifically, like if we look at breast cancer, colorectal cancer, prostate cancer, pancreatic cancer, if we look at bladder cancer, if we look at non-Hodgkin's lymphoma, all are reduced through vitamin D. Where do you get vitamin D from? The sun. Where do you get specifically the UV? So actually, all those people go, what about your cancer? What about the cancers that it actually reduced the risk of? What about all those diseases that I just mentioned that it actually reduces your chances of? What about sunlight can improve metabolic syndrome? And higher vitamin D levels and other UV induced mediators, so other effects of the UV part of the spectrum, are associated with lower prevalence of metabolic syndrome, improving diabetes and obesity, and they can prevent the formation of non-alcoholic fatty liver disease. What about if I said that vitamin D and sun exposure can help slow down the progression of neurodegeneration? What about if I said that vitamin D can help prevent the not prevent but slow down the progression of Alzheimer's? What if I said regular sun exposure can improve eyesight? No, because all those people that say the sunlight negatively affects your eyesight, well, yes, if you expose yourself to lots of them, and if you look at the real research coming out now, actually they're starting to understand that it's the blue light that has the very negative effects on eyesight. Now they're starting to understand that it's the screens in front of you, bang, 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 bang. But no one's telling you about that. No one's telling you about wear blue light blocking glasses in the evening with the screens. They're still telling you put your sunglasses on. And I'm saying the opposite. When you go outside in the morning, don't wear the sunglasses, because you need those signals just to anchor your circadian rhythm in order for you to sleep better. And so when I was out for my walk today, I saw a family of 5, of mum and dad and their 3 kids. None of them had sunglasses on. and they were out, and it was before 8 o'clock, and the kids were all climbing on the climbing frames and stuff. And I thought, wow, those kids are going to sleep well tonight. And then I saw some other kids with sunglasses on, and I'm thinking, one kid is getting all the signals, another one's not. I don't know the situations, but I have my own opinions on that. We'll come back to sun exposure, UV, etc., etc. Yeah, because that was what I was talking about, eyesight and anchoring circadian rhythms. But actually, regular sun exposure is a preventative on myopia, and those kids they've had associations between those kids that spend more time outdoors, so more time outdoors, not indoors, not on the blue light screens, but outside in a natural wavelength, had lower prevalence of myopia when they grew up. And so actually, far from damaging eyesight, actually the UV exposure and solar radiation might actually improve eyesight. Whether that's through the release of dopamine, or whether it's some other aspects, maybe it's the red and the infrared that are reducing inflammation. It's not 100% sure, but we know that it happens. But most of the diseases that I've mentioned increase in incidence the further you go from the equator. So the further north or the further south you go away from the equator, the higher the incidence is. And what also happens the further you go from the equator? Vitamin D levels shrink. Now, in Scandinavia, we are slightly luckier in as far as the Scandinavian population and culture has a larger intake of fatty fish. But as again, what's happening is fatty fish is fairly high in vitamin D and vitamin D3, which is a big difference between vitamin D3 and vitamin D2, but we're not going to go into that today. But needless to say, vitamin D3 is more effective than vitamin D2. And if we understand that, and then we can actually increase the amount of fatty fish that we have in the winter, then we'll keep vitamin D levels high. But that's not everything. Because the things that are most associated with excessive exposure to UV are skin cancers. And maybe that's the reason why people avoid the sun. But what you've got to understand is sun exposure actually may improve survival rates of people with skin cancer. I'll say that again. Sun exposure may actually improve survival rates in people with skin cancer. So chronic exposure to UV radiation reduces and delays the development of various melanomas, the most lethal skin cancers. Non-burning exposure, what I always say about, be sensible. So you're not going out there to cook and burn. So non-burning sun exposure is associated with a reduced risk of melanomas, while sunburns are, of course, associated with doubling of the risk of melanomas. And that's the key difference people have got to understand, is that it's not the sun you need to be scared of. You just got to be sensible with it and stop burning. And so I'm out in the sun every day, and I try and be out there. And I'm getting the protective benefits, whether we're talking about the UV associated mediators, or whether we're talking about vitamin D, or whether we're talking about the UV radiation that reduces delays or actually reduces the risk of various melanomas. Because I'm not burning, I'm out there just allowing my body to get what it needs from the sun without burning. Now, what people need to understand is it's sporadic exposure to UV radiation that causes burning, as well as the lack of longer wavelengths. And so if you understand that, then you start to understand actually the sun isn't anything to be scared of. Once you start to understand that the melanomas are more frequent or more frequent and more prevalent among those that work indoors, you start to understand that there is, and again, correlation does not equal causation, I understand, but you start to understand that there is a difference between sun exposure, being scared of the sun, and burning. It's as simple as that. Sun exposure, good. Being scared of the sun, not good. Right next to that, burning, not good. And once we start to understand that, once we start to get away from spending all our occupational time, all our free time indoors, then we start to understand that sun exposure is actually associated with increased survival from melanoma. I will say that again. Sun exposure is actually associated with increased survival from melanoma. Cancer patients who have a higher cumulative sun exposure have better chances for survival. Again, cancer patients who have a higher cumulative sun exposure have better chances for survival. And that comes back to, if you're inadequate, if you don't acclimatise yourself to the sun at that time of year, so if you don't go outside the whole year, then your vitamin D levels are tanked out anyway, probably. Your health is probably not where it should be. But on the other hand, if you then go and if you work in an office 9 to 5, 8 to 4, and then you have your weekend off and you go and binge the sun, then yes, you might be increasing your skin cancer risk because you are not acclimatizing to the UV radiation at your given time of year. So you are not acclimatizing to your UV radiation, and therefore you are increasing your risk of sunburn and the corresponding increase in risk of both non-melanomas and melanoma skin cancers. But that is it. Once you start to understand that actually regular sun exposure is protective against skin cancer. I'll say it again, regular sun exposure is actually protective against skin cancer, as well as all the things I mentioned earlier on with regards to neurodegenerative disease, allergies, various other internal cancers. What you've got to understand is that you've got to acclimate to your environment. So expecting your body to be able to deal with 8 hours of sunshine on a Saturday, even though you spent Monday to Friday inside in an office and you've had no sun exposure, is idiotic. The sun is nothing to be scared of. The sun is something to be, I'm not going to say worshipped, because it shouldn't be worshipped either. Well, it should be worshipped in the sense that it gives everything life. But the sun is nothing to be scared of. But you have to be sensible with your own sun exposure. You have to be sensible in as far as you can get the benefits. And there, as I listed, there are a whole host of benefits of sun exposure. And the people that have the biggest risk of the increased melanomas and non-melanomas are those that have inadequate acclimatization to their UV radiation. So they are the office workers or the people that stay inside and then go and binge. So what I would always suggest is be sensible with your sun exposure. But don't fear sun exposure. Don't fear it. Have a great day. The weather is beautiful.